to order, and we'll go to our. Hey, good afternoon. Happy New Year, everybody, coming from the city of Milpitas. What a great way to kick off this new year together for this special meeting. And we'll be doing a little bit of training. A shout out to everybody tuning in all across the world, and of course our Milpitas world on Facebook Live or YouTube.com. Certainly a challenging time in our city and every city in the world, but we're here together, and I know that together we're gonna keep it going here through these pandemic times. All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I do see a quorum, and we'll go to our city clerk, Wendy Wood, for the roll call.
Councilmember Chua? Here. Councilmember Dominguez?
Present.
Councilmember Fan?
Present.
Vice Mayor Montano?
Here.
Mayor Tran?
I'm here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Next up is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
All right. And next up, we'll go to the public forum. We'll do public forum here. Let's see who we got with us. Welcome to all our panelists, as well as attendees. I do see members of the public. We'll do 3 minutes for public forum. All right, public forum, please raise your virtual hand. As folks know, we've gone remote here at City Hall. Public safety and things continue to be on site as necessary. And we are virtual and remote here to start off the year. Hopefully we won't do this too long, and that'll be a positive sign. I'll go to the attendees. Raise your virtual hand if you'd like to speak here during the public forum. Okay, going once, going twice. I see no virtual raised hands. We'll keep it going to the announcements. We'll go to our city manager, Stephen McHarris, for any announcements.
Thank you, Mayor Tran, members of the council. Good afternoon. I have no announcements for the special meeting.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to the council. Myself, I have no announcements, and ready to jump into the training announcements. I'll look for any virtual raised hands by my colleagues. Seeing none, seeing one. Councilmember Fan.
Hey, everyone. I recently tested positive for COVID. So if it's okay with all of you, I'll be doing most of the meeting off screen.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Your health is the #1 priority for us all.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And hopefully you're isolated. I believe you are. Okay, great. Okay, any further virtual raised hands? Okay, since I'm at announcements, I want to get support from the council here. I've been working with the Vice Mayor, Carmen Montano, and we've been trying to find a way to get some access to COVID testing. So we would like the city manager to explore finding a contractor, an outside service. Explore is the key word, to explore finding an outside COVID testing service. I know I've received a number of emails from outside services to provide testing. And so the Vice Mayor and I would like for the city manager to explore, EXPLORE, some outside services for COVID testing, PCR type of testing. And let's see what we can gather, and we'll go from there. Okay. All right. Next up with the virtual raised hand, Councilmember Dominguez.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I definitely echo that suggestion. I know that the staff has been trying to reach that COVID-19 testing, and it's just, I was in contact with the governor's office There is no testing available right now. And so I don't want to put that, definitely please explore it. But I do understand that there is, the testing is held up due to weather conditions and other situations. So our entire state is in a shortage of testing. So I do want to thank our staff. They have been working with the county and our community. I just want to say thank you so much. You guys, we've all been working really hard together. The pop-up testing sites would not have been able to happen without the leadership of our recreation staff as well as our city manager, where you have been able to do a service here in Milpitas that no other place in the county has. And so I want to thank you for that. I was out there last week. And so just want to tell everybody that the testing continues in Milpitas on Mondays and on Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. There has been a request by the city manager to increase that testing. And so because there is staff shortages, it's really hard for the city of Milpitas to man the stations because our staff is getting sick. So we're in that challenge, but we're gonna definitely explore and rise up together. I do wanna ask for this council for the support of, at this point, try to figure out what we could control, and that's face coverings. Face coverings are a preventive tool. It's something that we could have access to. I would like to ask this council to please support and give direction to our city manager to add to the EOC, which is our Emergency Operations Center, to add the ability for them to buy masks and to distribute them to our community. Right now, that is not part of the EOC. And so they cannot get free supplies from the county for us to all have access to. That includes the council. I think we need to work together to pump up these masks out. And if that is currently a resource that the county has, it has been confirmed, but it does need a council approval to add that into the EOC. I confirmed that as of 9:07 this morning. So I do hope that I could get your support, not me, it's our community needs that. There is a lot of members in our community who cannot afford these face coverings, and they are available by the county, but we need to give the authorization to the city manager to sign off and include this as part of the EOC. I hope that I get your kind support for this in order to help our Milpitas residents stay safe, and thank you so much for your consideration.
We'll go to the city manager here. Let's talk about the EOC for 30 seconds or so. Some brief information. I'm not privy to the understanding that the EOC distributes face masks. That is not their function, is it?
That's correct, Mayor. So I did check. I have been in contact with the county on this topic. The EOC at the county, as well as the EOCs at the cities, are not in the business of laying out or providing and distributing face masks to the public. Face masks have been used for personnel to keep operations going for all the government agencies. So that's been the position we're in. So I'm not sure, if I did explore, I'm not sure where I'd be going with it other than asking the county to provide face masks, which, by the way, would not necessarily be reimbursable. Likely they'd be charged to us. So we would be expending funds somewhere to pay for that.
Yeah, I appreciate the concern. And I think almost 2 years into this pandemic, most people are familiar with the face coverings. Thank you very much, Council Member.
Hold on 2 seconds. I
Mayor
want
Tran,
to
can I
point
just
of
jump
clarification.
Can I
if
jump
I
in
may.
for a second, Mayor Tran, please? 2 things for the council. One, this is limited to announcements today. I don't think staff included on the agenda announcements of future agenda items for discussion. And I also just wanted to caution the council about getting into a discussion on this topic because I see some hands being raised.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate the legal opinion and acknowledge it. So we'll do a quick reset here. Future agenda items is not on the agenda. We do have a meeting next Tuesday. Folks are more than welcome to put forward any great ideas to help others. Okay, great. Announcements here. I see a virtual raised hand. We'll go to Councilmember Chua.
Thank you, Mayor Tran. I just want to add to your request, and also Vice Mayor, it's immediate because it is really needed. in terms of exploring other sources of testing. And also I want to request briefly from because I know the city manager sends out email. What I'm looking for is a flyer that we can share on our social media outlets individually, because we don't have that. You have the verbiage on your email, but we need a simplified one that we can just shoot to Facebook and all social media that we have. If you can do that and update it as soon as you find an update, please do that as soon as possible. And also, I just want to say, I hope Councilmember Anthony, that you feel better soon. So
Thank you.
that's
I
it.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tran.
You're welcome. Announcements, folks. Let's keep it to the announcements. Thank you. Vice Mayor Montano.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to ensure that we reinstate the ordinance of that mask coverings are mandated throughout the city for businesses and residents. So that's what I'm proposing. Also, I want Anthony to get better, get well, get soon, and take care of yourself. That's it. And I think we need to
Thank
move
you.
on with this meeting with Ms. Jenkins.
Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, folks, that's it for announcements. Any requests, we'll bring it forward to next Tuesday. We'll go down the day as next Tuesday for the future agenda items. Fittingly, fantastic, thank you. So I'll take a note of what you need. And I'll finish up the announcements here by sending my warmest wishes to Councilmember Fan to quickly recover. And I appreciate your strength today as you join us virtually, despite your condition. We appreciate you. That took a
Thank you.
decision and you made it. Yeah, appreciate that. All right, moving on here, folks. Announcements to conflict of interest. Then we'll go back to our city attorney, Christopher Diaz.
Thank you, Mayor Tran. I'll make this quick because I don't think any of you guys have conflicts on the topic, but does anybody have a personal or financial conflict of interest related to the item on today's agenda? And I'll start at the end. Councilmember Chua.
None.
Thank you. Councilmember Dominguez.
None.
Thank you. Councilmember Fan.
None.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Montano.
None.
Thank you. And Mayor Tran.
And myself as a none. Thank you very much. And Chris, if you can do one more thing for us.
Happy to, Mayor. So I'll read the Milpitas City Council Code of Conduct. Be respectful and courteous. Words, tone, and body language do matter. Model civility. Avoid surprises. Praise publicly and criticize privately. Focus on the issue, not the person. Refrain from using electronic devices while on the council dais. And now that we've transitioned back to Zoom, that does include the Zoom format that you are on today. Disclose conflicts of interest and affiliations related to agenda items. Separate governing from campaigning. The council speaks with one voice after making policy on issues. Respect the line between policy and administration. And then finally, the council will hold one another accountable to comply with this code of conduct. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. We'll keep going here. Approval agenda. I'll move to approve the agenda. I need a second.
Second.
We got a second from Councilmember Chu. We'll go down the line. Councilmember Chu.
Aye.
Councilmember Dominguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Fan.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Montano.
Aye.
Myself as an aye. We'll keep it going here. Let's go to the agenda item. Here we are. And agenda item one and only, implicit bias training and diversity and inclusion training. And let's welcome our very important guest, Janine Jenkins. How you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Welcome to Milpitas.
Why, thank you. I am honored to be able to come into your community today, to be able to talk about a topic that I think all of us can relate to. This is something that all of us have, we all have a stake in, to be able to understand and to be able to connect. So I am glad that I have been invited to talk about this topic. And so we will talk about implicit bias. And today, the conversation will be really in the whole sort of idea of diversity, right? Because I think a lot of times when we talk about diversity, we talk about it in a vacuum, and we can't do that. We can't talk about diversity without talking about all of those pieces that come with it. This is a topic that I really do enjoy, so I appreciate you having me today.
Hey, we appreciate having you. Yes, absolutely.
All right, so we will get started. And so the way I like to get started is I like to kind of set the tone around what we're talking about. So I want you to take a second and think with me about the course of your career and what you have done up to this moment today. And as you think about that, I want you to think about a time where you didn't feel welcome, or a time where you didn't feel regarded, where you didn't feel heard, not because you didn't use your voice, but because it came from you. And I want you to think about what happened in that moment. What emotion came over you? How did you feel? What was said? So take a second and think about that for a minute, right? A time where you felt disregarded, where you didn't feel welcome, you didn't feel heard, not because it you didn't speak up, but because it didn't come from you. And this isn't necessarily for discussion. I just want you to kind of go back to that moment. What did that feel like? What emotion came over you? You know, when I do this with other groups, you know, I like to sort of folks to think about, like, what was the ripple effect of that, right? So that moment happened. And then as a result of that moment, what else happened, right? You know, I can think back into my personal experience, and that moment rippled into me leaving the organization. So think about that for you. And what, as you think about that, what emotion, what happened to you? What did you feel as a result? I'm not asking about that particular moment, but I want to know, like, what was the emotion that you felt as a result of that moment? You can feel free to just jump in or raise your hand or chat me even if you're more comfortable. I am good either way.
Yeah, I mean, this is an open discussion, so no virtual hands needed at this point. There's no sort of, you don't need for me to call on you as the person presiding over the meeting during this item today. So I want folks to just make your voice heard, and we will respect your time.
I felt disrespected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I didn't matter.
Yeah. And then I imagine there were other ripple effects as a result of feeling disrespected and as if you did not matter, both personally and maybe even professionally. What other emotions do you recall? What other emotions? And my personal, oh, go ahead.
Are you speaking to Councilmember Dominguez?
In general, everyone, in general, just open discussion. What other emotions?
I felt like my community didn't matter. And that's important to me.
Yep. In my personal experience, I felt lonely. I felt in a room full of people, I felt like I was all by myself. And whatever emotion that came over you, right? Let's sort of apply that to the context of the city of Milpitas and the work that you do, right? So when we have those emotions, right? The emotions that you felt in that moment, when that comes to our current organization, what can happen to the people that we work with? What can happen to the people that work for us if they are feeling that way? How does that affect them? How can that affect our constituents when they feel disrespected, like they don't matter, alone? What are some of the implications of that from a professional standpoint?
Well, I believe that the foundation of trust gets broken and people will start to leave.
Yep, people will start to leave. Yeah. Anyone else with any other ideas of how those emotions will play out professionally? How does that affect the work product? How does it affect teamwork?
There's no team because there's no direction, there's no movement towards a common goal. And so it's really hard to restructure the foundation when the foundation is broken, and then silence just happens and then you just get stagnant.
Yeah. When these emotions sort of come into work, there is an effect. Whether we want to believe it or not, it affects the team. It affects what the team is able to do. It affects what the team is able to accomplish. And so hopefully, and I'm gonna trust that you are answering these questions in your head and that you'll share your wonderful answers with me at some point later in our time today together. Because we're here till 5 o'clock, right? So, this is like what we're talking about is the importance of a culture of inclusion. What you felt, that disrespect or that loneliness, that disregard, that is what it feels like when we do not have inclusion. And I would venture to say that even if you take a look back at your situation, and if I were to say, how many in that situation, how many of you know without a doubt that the intent was to be mean, right? Don't answer that, right? But I would say that for a lot of us, the intent of the situation wasn't intended to be lacking inclusion. And so what that tells us is that regardless of the intent, when someone feels unwelcome, disrespected, devalued, or not heard, the damage is done. And when we're talking about our teams, when we're talking about our constituents, it impacts participation. And if participation is impacted, then we can't help but to have an end product that is also impacted. And let's face it, when we don't have the full participation of the team, when we don't have the full complement of what the team has to offer, the end product is not as good as it otherwise could have been with the full spectrum of participation. And so that's why we are here today. We are here today to talk about the concept of diversity, the concept of inclusion, and why it matters, because it does. We've already talked about what happens when it doesn't matter. And today we're going to spend time talking about what happens when it does. And so my name is Janine Jenkins, and I am going to be your facilitator today. And I am here because it is my passion around building community. I have 20 years of experience in human resources. All of that time has been leading teams, helping to create teams and really develop leaders and others around the choices that lead to inclusion, the choices that lead to belonging. This is my form of activism. I am someone who, if I am going to be active around my community for issues on change and social justice, I choose to be active in building community and building spaces where we get to have these conversations. In our conversation today, we're going to talk about the impact of a lack of diversity and inclusion, as well as what happens when it's embraced, because there is a difference and there are tangible benefits. We're going to talk about the impact of some of the dimensions of diversity. And so I'll take you through some dimensions of diversity, and then we'll maybe talk about, like, how do we demonstrate inclusion? How do we make sure that those groups are included in the correct way within the work that you do? And throughout our time together today, we are going to talk about what you can do to create an environment and a culture of inclusion. And so I need your participation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to participate. We want to introduce ourselves too, since we're going to be here.
Sure.
We want to connect with you, So we'll go ahead and let's do some introductions down the dais here. We want to let you know who we are.
Sure.
Have you been to Milpitas before?
Yes, I have. I haven't stayed in Milpitas, but I've definitely had some good food in Milpitas. That's for sure.
Yeah. So Milpitas, I think we're one of the most special city in the world, particularly when it comes to diversity and inclusion. If you look at our history and our town's development was really based on inclusion. We used to have a Ford factory here decades ago. And so a lot of folks came in to work at the Ford factory, which is now the Great Mall of the Bay Area, people from all over the country. And we have a neighborhood called Sunny Hills. That's where the vice mayor is from. And we had the first Black mayor in California, Mayor Ben Gross. When the city was over 90% white, we had the first Black mayor. And that really opened up a lot of doors for all the other cultures. The federal immigration policies that passed in 1970. So you started seeing a lot of Pacific Islanders, other folks from around the world. So they used to come to Milpitas because it was a place that was open. And so if you look at our demographics today, we are the most diverse city in America. And so we're happy to have you here. I'm Rich Tran, the mayor of Milpitas. My family moved here in the 4th grade, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I used to be a social worker, and so at San Jose State, we master's in social work program. Our focus was on transcultural perspective, and so that I'm deeply rooted in diversity, and it's just a blessing to call Milpitas home. All right, next up, Vice Mayor Montano.
Thank you, Mayor. So welcome, Janine, Ms. Jenkins, and a little bit of background about myself. I've been here in Milpitas since 1964, was moved here when I was in the 2nd grade. And we moved in the neighborhood called Sunny Hills, which is is the first planned integrated neighborhood in the country. And during that time, as the mayor had indicated, it was a blue collar neighborhood where most of the folks worked at General Motors or Ford Motor Company. So it was a really nice place. And you had a lot of different cultures. Your neighbor could be Filipino, across the street, African American, and it was really that. And that's the neighborhood that I grew up in, and I feel blessed because I was able to appreciate all the different cultures, and not every neighborhood has that opportunity. So I feel very blessed, and it's also a ripple effect of the whole city, that one little neighborhood, and it was affordable at that time. The neighborhood was created by the Ford Motor Company, United Auto Workers, and the Quakers, and also the Teamsters back east. and they created a co-op, and that's how it became affordable for a lot of the workers that were discriminated against, because Santa Clara used to be a very racist county, and they did not allow African Americans or other people of color to buy real estate. So there you go. That was back in the 60s. So you can imagine. And so that was when Ben Gross and his team, they put their heads together and they said, let's create a co-op. And that was it. That was the creation of Sunny Hills. And I still have family there. My daughter, my grandchildren, they live there. And we're very, very, very much deeply rooted in this community. I'm also a school teacher, retired school teacher, and I have 3 grandkids. I have 2 adult children, and they play sports here. They grew up here, and they're going to be here for a very, very long time. So, and then I got involved in improving my neighborhood, because there was a time when the city was neglecting our neighborhood, and because we were an older neighborhood. So that's when I created the Sunny Hills Improvement Association. And that was really the beginning of my involvement in public service. And that's when I was invited by Mayor Pete McHugh to serve on the Parks and Recs Commission. And then I also served on the Library Commission and the Planning Commission. And then I ran for a school board, and I served on the school board for 8 years. So I have deep, deep roots in Milpitas. And then I ran for city council, and I'm here. This is my second term that I've run here, that I've been on the council, and now I'm the vice mayor. I served as a vice mayor previously to the mayor, that was Jose Estevez. And so now I'm running for mayor.
Thank you for keeping it brief, Vice Mayor. Thank you for keeping it brief.
Thank you.
You don't have all day, all right?
I hear you.
Hey, all right. Next up, Councilmember Fan.
Yeah, I don't really know where to begin.
Just tell me your name and what your district is, and yeah, that'll work.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, my name's Anthony Fan. I got elected to the council in 2016. Started my term actually with the mayor, Mayor Tran, and have been very blessed to serve our Milpitas community for the past 5 years. Yeah, I think Milpitas is such a diverse community, and it's really what makes this city great. And I look forward to continuing the conversation as to how we can improve it.
Fantastic. Next up, we have Councilmember Dominguez.
Good afternoon. My name is Karina Dominguez, and Milpitas is my home. I moved here in the late 90s as a single parent. I have a daughter who's in her senior year at USD, and my parents are farm workers. They actually worked the apricot fields here, and they wanted to buy a home here, but they couldn't afford one. So they bought a home on the east side of San Jose, and then they built some equity, and they invested into buying a home here in Milpitas, where I decided to raise my daughter. So I'm deeply rooted in this community that definitely has a history of diversity and inclusion. Personally, I do believe that diversity and inclusion is so much more than just saying, I have somebody that is of this ethnic race, or I understand someone else's culture because I've listened to it. I think that diversity and inclusion really is something we need to take a deeper lens into the roots of what is our own biases, and how do we, from a policy perspective, are able to understand the different perspectives of those and know our own biases when we're developing policy. And so when I think of diversity inclusion, and we're about to move into in the next couple of hours, it's really thinking about every single Milpitian in our city and knowing their needs and where they're coming from. And when we're developing a policy, how can I, as a policymaker, grow from this training and really listen to develop some sustainable solutions in order for Milpitas to move forward? Because I do believe that we have had an amazing history here that is diverse, but I do believe things are changing. People can't afford to live here. For example, I work full-time in a public service. And so by 11 o'clock, I'm tired, right? So these political spaces sometimes are not built for people like me because I don't have that financial wealth. And so I am deeply appreciative of the opportunity to serve as a council member. It's a dream I never even thought of until our community said, you know, we needed someone that understands the working class perspective. And I also think that it's important for me to learn the strengths of my colleagues because I believe in building a true team. And there's something that I am deeply committed to is that I don't know it all. And I do things very, very differently. For example, I worked for elected officials for the last couple of years of my life. So I'm a very staffer oriented. If I see a problem, I jump in and I fix it. And so for me, I'm a fixer, right? As a single mom, you fix things. When someone comes and asks you for help in the middle of an emergency, you jump in, and that's why I ran for office. But it's something that I hope that at the end of this training, I hope that each individual on this call is able to see the strengths of each individual and also see the challenges of each individual. And how are we going to help each other lift each other up and respect one another? Because our common goal is the city of Milpitas. It's not ourselves. It's not, I like you. You know, one of my supervisors once said, diversity and inclusion is really understanding, I may not like you. I don't want to be your friend. I'm not going to be your best friend. I may not even call you if I have an issue. But it is putting those differences aside. So when there is a common goal, we're going to say, you know what, I'm going to lift you up. And right now, this is how it doesn't matter the intent, but you said X, and it is my responsibility to tell you, hey, you made me feel this way. And then you have an open dialogue, because that's when miscommunication happens and a team breaks. Voters elected us to be a team. We didn't select to be each other's colleagues. But there was something so special in each one of us that I still believe till this day. Each one of us is here because we love this city. There's no doubt about that. We just do things so differently. So I just hope that by the end of this training, my goal is to get a deeper understanding of my colleagues' perspectives, how I could help them, build maybe some of those challenges, but also how can we create a true team? Because at the end of the day, Milpitas is watching us, and this isn't about us. It's about we need to create a team during this pandemic. Systems are falling apart, and we're all here because the people elected us. And so for me, that is what diversity and inclusion means, is how can we respect each other's differences and perspectives and really help each other and care for one another as just a human being. It's just the fact that, we're human. We're going to spend time, at least the next year together. So how are we going to be able to lift each other up so we could be the best team? Because I believe that we have a very strong person, but we're just as weak as the weakest person. So if we don't build that true team, it's going to be extremely challenging for those that we take care of, right, for this process to happen. So that's what diversity and inclusion means for me. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you spending your Friday afternoon till 5 o'clock with us. And I thank all of my colleagues for being in attendance. That means a lot. That means for me, Councilmember Fan, I hope you feel better. If there's anything you need, I'm right around the corner. Literally, we're neighbors. And so I just do hope that at the end of this training, we all encompass the Milpitas family spirit that we all feel and breathe so much. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. Just want to check in with you, Janine. Are you providing training on team, like industrial organization or team dynamics, or are we doing training on implicit bias?
So it's kind of all wrapped into one. I mean, so the title of this particular training is Why Diversity and Inclusion Matters. And so it will be a little bit of all of that.
Okay, I just want to check. Yeah, I kind of prep myself for the agenda items. So let's go to Councilmember Chua.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, Janine. My name is Evelyn Chua. I've lived in Milpitas for 35 years, and my daughter graduated from Milpitas High School, and also my son-in-law graduated from Milpitas High School as well. And my background career-wise, I'm corporate, and I've been an IT project manager for big companies, and I'm really happy to serve the community of Milpitas and also the support of most of my council members. We have the same, I think, core and goals and objectives for our city, and looking forward to your training. And I would like to see the following: your goals. What are your goals for this training? How would you measure your goals being achieved at the end of this training? And any other feedback from you would be helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Tran.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you very much. All right. This is us, Janine. We here today. Let's go to you. Take us away.
Sure. So yeah, so for me, it's one thing to talk about diversity. Like, I don't talk about diversity in a vacuum. Like, we can't talk about diversity and not talk about just all of the other pieces that it touches. So there will be pieces that I think I will be asking questions about. So how does this apply to your constituents? How does this apply to each other? Because I think when we don't consider these pieces, we do inadvertently tamp down on all of the positive energy that can come from both of those groups, right? So there will be some of that in there. I mean, and it's also about like just sort of walking down the sidewalk in terms of general societal sort of connection. So there's a little bit of all of this involved in it, because I think we gotta kind of look at it holistically to make sure that we apply it as effectively as possible. I don't believe you can turn it off and turn it on. So that's kind of the approach that I take when speaking about this particular topic. But I encourage you to all just sort of jump in wherever, because it is one of those things intended for us to be able to have a conversation so that we get the most out of it as possible. And so, so Councilmember Chua had asked about my goals for this training. And so I'll take us back to sort of the objectives. So it is really to be able to give you those ideas around why this is so important, because there is an impact. And if you don't understand the impact, if you don't know what those outcomes are, you can't assess how well you are doing in the work that you do. Because when it comes to this work, there's no pill to take. There's no pill to take. There is no, like, you can get a certification, but I promise you it's going to be outdated tomorrow, right? So it's all about this continuous learning, this continuous sort of adding to your toolkit. And so it's really about, when you walk away, do you know what you will do going forward to create that connection and to ensure that those around you are valued, but also that you are recognizing when something has happened that could be devaluing. Because I mean, I think we all do stuff that unintentionally is devaluing. I have a friend of mine, and she is single, no children, not married, and she has nieces. And I just jokingly was like, okay, girl, it's time for you to step up. And she said, why does everybody always assume that because I don't have children that I have the time to step up? And I was like, okay, so that's not what I meant. Didn't realize it was gonna go there, right? And we're great friends, but that's just an example of really not sort of thinking about that dimension of diversity, because that wasn't my perspective. My intent was not harmful, but it based on her response, it didn't make her feel good. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we have to be able to step back and say, you know what, that wasn't the right thing to say. Let's talk through that, because I don't want to do that again. And I guarantee you do it every day. I know I do. And so I think that's what the outcome for this is going to be. I will say, when it comes to this kind of training, one of the struggles that folks have is that the outcomes are they're not concrete. You can't check off a box. It's really just about your continued learning. So here's a quote that I gleaned from Bill Crawford. He has a book called Leading Differently, and then it's an organizational development book. And just really sort of remembering that diversity is different than inclusion. Diversity is a fact. It's a description of what is. And inclusion is that interaction that's essential for effective teams. And that team can be you as a group. It can be your constituents. It could be your staff. All teams need inclusion to help sort of move them forward. And if anybody on the team doesn't feel included, then we've not done our job. And so everybody gets to feel included, regardless of their dimension of diversity. And so that's how I start that, because those are some of the things that I want us to be able to denote between as we leave here today. So have any of you read any of the documents, be it from Harvard Business Review, Deloitte and Touche, Catalyst.org, around the benefits that you receive from diverse and inclusive teams?
I have.
Okay.
I was at NYU for my master's in public management and policy at the Wagner School of Public Service, and that's when I first got really introduced to a whole bunch of case studies from Harvard. And so, in taking graduate courses such as strategic management, human resources development, those sorts of things, I was able to read a few case studies from Harvard.
So then let's have what I'd like to do here is I'd like to take a second to have conversation around, these are the four main buckets: talent, innovation and group performance, reputation and responsibility, financial performance. So my first question is, when you look at this list, do these things apply to you and what you do? Are these things important to you and what you do?
Yes.
How does talent apply? Talent in the form of who's on the team and where you're seeking those people out. How does that apply to you and what you do?
If I don't hear anybody, I'll just jump in again, because we want to make this a lively afternoon, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. No, talent is key. I think all four of those things I really look to shoot for here at City Hall. Just like supporting other people in the community, getting people onto the city council. You got to have talent to be here. It's not a, I think in a realistic world, the residents, Milpitas families, we got about 77,000 people in this town right now. Last time I checked, and I think when I grew up here, it was like half or so. So we got like a small town feeling, 13 square miles. Everybody kind of knows each other. So, in terms of the talent, our families, that's really driven by the families. Folks in Milpitas want for talent and innovation and group performance. That rings a bell too. I'll be really quick here. I know there's 4 bullets, but innovation is like new ideas, I think, and this council's done a fantastic job of bringing new ideas forward. Reputation and responsibility. Yeah, we do have what's called talk of the town here in Milpitas, and so that reputation piece is key. The responsibility piece is key. We've had elected officials in the past that were a little bit irresponsible, in my own words, and so the residents and the families, that matters. And financial performance, I harp every day. The fiscal health of our city is very key. But throughout all that, though, at the top, it says diversity matters. And, I think that diversity drives many alternatives and options and competition. The more diverse you are, the more competitive you are, I think, in so many ways. And competition drives high quality. And so, yeah, that's why diversity matters.
Yeah, it does. And when you are talking about like what you do, the most diverse ecosystems are the strongest. So when you think about your system, and I pulled up your demographics, and so I saw the breakdown from a demographic standpoint, and all of those people from 66.9% down to 3.4%, that and everything in between is diversity. And just because there's one group with 66.9% or one group with 3.4%, that group with 3.4% still needs to feel that who they are and what they represent matters, right? So
I got positive quick. We don't have a group that's 66%.
I was looking at census data, and it's behind.
We don't have a 66% here in town. Yeah, we don't have that.
So I was looking at the census data. I think this date, I can go back through my notes. It's because it's census data, it's probably behind a couple of years or so. So yeah, the last census was maybe as of 2021. Yeah.
You're referring to the Asian Pacific Islander. That's aggregated data. I always try to let folks know, like, okay, it might say 66% Asian Pacific Islander, but we all different. Like, we speak different languages. We're from different motherlands and homelands. Like, my Filipino partners speak Tagalog. My culture, they speak Vietnamese. Koreans, they do their own thing. Chinese, Taiwanese. So everybody, we're different. And there's no group that has a significant advantage over another in Milpitas, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and and it's not about advantage, not about advantage at all. It's about everybody being represented and everybody knowing that who they are matters, right? So when we talk about diversity in our cities, it actually begets diversity. So if diversity begets diversity from a constituent standpoint, what does that mean?
I think for me, when as I'm hearing you talk, I completely agree. I think that passion is hard to teach, right? Compassion is hard to teach. Empathy is hard to teach. But I do think absolutely that the community has elected us for the talents that they see in us, right? Again, all of us have our own strengths and all of us have our own challenges. If it's something that I have seen is that I agree with you. It's that lens of diversity of I want to understand a perspective. And even if I don't fully understand it, I want someone that by the end of a conversation, right? Even getting to a conversation sometimes is extremely difficult because we all come with our own traumas. You know, generational trauma is a real thing. And when you start understanding your own trauma, you start understanding, okay, what are the words or the things that people say or push that makes me feel less than, that doesn't make me feel important? Then you get yourself out of that personal defensiveness. And it's like, whoa, it ain't about me, right? And what's helped me is really understanding like, whoa, this person might come with trauma. This person might be yelling at me because, and that didn't hit me honestly until maybe the last 2 years, where it's like, whoa, like this person really is angry, not for the sake of being angry. There is a need there, or they got their own baggage that I could only listen to. But at the same time, right, is how do we use that innovation and that group performance, because that's important. That's going to impact our measurable goals. That's going to impact our objectives. That's going to impact all of these things that we do. I think that responsibility and reputation, the city of Milpitas is so special because I personally believe that they could feel. I ran into somebody last week and they said, you know what, Karina, I could smell BS and I know authenticity, right? I know when someone's like, you know what, I don't know how I'm going to make it happen, but I'm going to make it happen because I care about you as a person. And you may not agree with me, but at the end, I care about you and let me see how I could help you. And I think financial performance is the voters elected us so because they trust us with their money, right? And so I know personally, my background as someone who came from a very poor community, a very humble household, who continues to work 2 to 3 jobs so I could help my senior parents and get my daughter through high school, that impacts me because I'm a public worker that works all day. And I have the amazing privilege to develop the policy that's going to hurt people, the working class, right? So for me, that's always the goal. But I've come to understand too that maybe someone else has a different background. So my responsibility is to share my background. But where I think sometimes it happens, and even with our constituency and even with ourselves, is how do we get ourselves to a place? I mean, I've done a lot of work to get to a place of, I'm going to really listen, right? Body language, figure out the traumas, that generational trauma, my own generational traumas, because we all have them. Everybody has them. So acknowledging, for example, this pandemic it's trauma for everybody. Just that alone, to just be able to say, this is a traumatic time, and just kind of sit with it, right? To sit with it, feel it, and then open up myself to listen. But there's people that can't even get there or don't like to talk because they are going through their own thing, right?
Sure.
So how do you get to understand diversity when communication is halted? And this happens with, when someone's like yelling at you, I've learned you just be quiet. And then you use your I statements and you rephrase, is this what you meant? Okay, help me understand what you meant by this. But when someone is not ready, how do you get to that diversity and inclusion so you could share your story?
Well, and I think that's how diversity begets diversity, right? When we look at organizations, and this is just sort of taking it back into an organizational development standpoint, when we look at those groups, those organizations that have that wide range of diversity from all of the things that we consider diversity, we now gain that perspective, right? And just because that person's a part of the conversation, it closes the gap. And so what we're talking about is, and there's some other concepts that we talk about. So trust, accountability, and consistency, that's how we build relationships, right? And so when we've got those relationships, we then we are more likely to open up and hear. Now, yeah, that is potentially a form of bias, right? So now, because now we're talking about affinity bias, right? We find how people are like us, we kind of latch on to that, and now we sort of work together. So when we're talking about talent, when we're talking about diverse ecosystems, or when we're talking about diversity begets diversity, when we have all of the diversity that people can see, so when people look at city council and they see the diversity that's represented, that attracts diversity. It attracts because they see themselves in whatever dimension represented, be it socioeconomic, be it parental, be it neurodiversity, be it education, whatever that case, we click together. And so therefore, the chances that you will represent my perspective because we share this same dimension of diversity, it's much a higher likelihood. And so that's why these things are important, because we got to get the diverse perspectives in the room to be able to add their voice to the conversation. And so I think when we've got the diversity, the listening has to open up because the diversity is here, right? I mean, if it's on your team, to not listen means to not support your team member. And that is not what we find acceptable from a team dynamic standpoint. So all of these things matter. And if you read the Harvard Business Review, Deloitte and Touche, you will see that they all roll up to, and financial performance is a byproduct of having all of these things in place, because you've got that. One of the byproducts of diversity is obviously innovation, group performance, which means better decision making. So that's going to roll up into financial performance and how we make decisions. And so we know that there is not necessarily a causation, but there is a correlation between teams that are diverse and inclusive and better financial performance. So there is work out there that supports everything that we're talking about and why we need to strive for it together as a group, because it is imperative on us in order to sort of meet the mission, to meet the needs of our constituents, in order for us to be able to do that. What questions do you have?
Any questions, folks? At this point? Now you're doing great, Janine. Oh, there you go. Councilmember Fan, I think I heard you.
Yeah. I don't know if it's so much of a question. I think it's more of a observation and an opinion of mine. But I think the whole concept of talent is one that is rooted in classism, because I think the whole idea of talent and those who are quote unquote talented have historically have had a advantage over other communities. And so when we take a look at talent and we apply it to things, say, like the workplace, and why are we not having the talent in this field or that field? And at the end of the day, it can be a number of reasons, but oftentimes people will point to, other communities don't have the talent, or we aren't getting applications from certain communities, or other communities aren't stepping up. And I think that is a really problematic view when it comes to talent, because I think that talent is such a subjective term, and we can find a lot of hidden talents in a lot of areas, and a lot of the times the talent is there. We just have to cultivate it. And so I think when having the conversation about talent, including that, I'm not I'm not so sure that that's the best concept to grasp.
I hear you. So you are correct. What happens, so you're right. So talent is talent, right? Everybody's got talent. Whether you're gonna say, oh, well, they didn't strike me as XYZ, or you know what, I'm really gonna work with this person and develop them. That's our bias, right? So what you're talking about is the biases that keep us from understanding that nobody owns talent. So
Absolutely.
so what you're talking about is, you know, well, so when I was a recruiter early on in my career, and when I started recruiting, University of Phoenix was just starting to get big, and we would get and it wasn't the right thing to do, but this is when you know better, you do better, right? We would get resumes from University of Phoenix, and because it didn't strike us as talented, because, well, who goes to school online? Oh my gosh, no. If you're going to go to college and get a degree, you're going to go to campus, you're going to get a 4-year degree, you're not going to, like, right? That's our bias for that person can't possibly be talented because they went to University of Phoenix, and University of Phoenix is online. But what we were really doing was we were being classist. We were saying that because their experience wasn't like ours, then they can't be talented. So you're right. We need to start to walk away from this concept of talent looks like X, and really do the work and ask the questions and stop making the assumptions. And so what you're talking about, I do actually talk about, because it's a bias. We have to overcome the biases that make us say those kinds of things, because at the end of the day, that's where it comes from. You're on point, definitely.
Sure. Thank you. I really appreciate you acknowledging that. And it's been, I think, difficult on all levels of government. I think there's a huge disparity in terms of representation, in terms of just being included in part of the conversation, especially folks who have, a voice at the decision-making table.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to how do we change that from the status quo?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the conversation. I mean, you've got all these people in your city, and everybody's got some talent to bring. And so think, and this may not be you, right? But I have seen some city council meetings online, and there are some cities where city council members, people will walk up to the mic and get during public comment, and you see the body language, right? And maybe it's because this person's been here before, you've heard right? But it's really about, and even in those moments, because I imagine, not being in your shoes, I imagine those are the harder moments to really be able to sort of steel yourself against, oh, it's them again, yay, right? Like, you're like, here we go. But to really listen, right? And really sort of not make the assumptions, oh, I know what they're gonna say, they've said it before, right? Like if we can work our way through that, and that takes learning, I think that's how we can get through and break down some of these barriers. But how much energy does that take, right? To even get through that. And you are one person, right? So it's their first time saying it, but it's your millionth time hearing it, right? And so you even in those moments, we still can't make the assumptions. And so I guess the question is, how do we solve it sooner? And then how do we communicate it so that we don't keep hearing it over and over and over again? Because as humans, we're gonna stop listening. But to not listen is to then allow our biases to sort of kick in. So there's a comment that there's so many layers of diversity and inclusion. What I have found is that the lack of diversity and inclusion stem from some type of prejudice or racism. From my experience, institutionalized racism is the worst type that hinders diversity and inclusion. Just like you mentioned, diversity begets diversity. Well, yeah, right. And so that will take us to sort of some of the other topics that we'll talk about, because there are, when we talk about bias, there is systemic inequities, which are sort of built on top of institutional inequity, which is built on top of interpersonal inequity, which is built on top of personal inequity. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But what I'd like to do now is, it is 10 after 2. I want to take a break because we've been going for a little bit. So can we take like a 10-minute break? Is that good?
No, that's perfect. I gotta tend to my dog.
All right, yes, let the dog out, go put the wash in the dryer, whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'll see you back here at 2:20. All right.
All right. We got a quorum here. I do see some video activity. So Janine, please take us away.
Sure. So to break down diversity, the first, like, I want to start there around diversity. When we think about diversity, we need to make sure that we continue to think about diversity as more. And I think Mayor Tran, you said it earlier. It's more than a monolith, right? It's not a monolith. It's not just one and everybody's the same. That is not the case when it comes to diversity. And so, just out of curiosity, when we're talking about diversity, what are some of the dimensions of diversity that you are thinking about when you are thinking about diversity? You can chat me or you can shout it out. What are some of the dimensions of diversity that you're thinking about when you're thinking about diversity?
So I have one. So when I think of diversity, I think about the workplace being a diverse, different ethnic backgrounds, different, just like the Sunny Hills neighborhood. So that, to me, that's diversity, ethnic diversity. But there's also other kinds. There's also other kinds of diversity. Diversity of thought, diversity of income, diversity of status, social status. So there's different layers. But the one that that I think is most relevant is the workplace diversity, and also on elected bodies. So that I think it's important for people to see people that look like them. So they can relate to them, and also the same thought, the same values, have that diversity that's important to them. So that's why that comes to my mind about diversity.
Yeah, when we think about diversity, a lot of times diversity, depending on who you're talking to, we start with race or ethnicity, and it kind of stops there. And so we have got to really broaden our definition of diversity all the time. So going forward, when we talk about diversity, I want you to think of an iceberg. And so why would I want you to think of an iceberg when we're talking about diversity? Why would I want you to think of an iceberg?
Maybe it's like the iceberg is what you could see on the top floating. But it's maybe the labels that we place, that could be it, like you literally could see it. But the iceberg is so much more. If you look under, you could see this massive foundation, kind of like roots of a tree, of like where there's more to it, right? There's so much more that the naked eye can't see, but it's there, right? And so it influences what you could see.
Yes. When we talk about, so when we're looking at an iceberg, only about 10% of an iceberg is above water. And so same thing when we're talking about diversity. What we're seeing is only about 10% of what that person brings to bear from a diversity standpoint. These are just a few of the various things that we could be talking about when we talk about diversity. And so that line, right? So when you see right now, it's sort of represented by water. So this line, this is called the line of invisibility, right? And depending on what you've got, these things are things that you cannot see. But think about how many times we might be saying something about a dimension of diversity that we can't see, right? Think about how many times we hear someone say, them, they, theirs, I don't understand it. I don't know why they're doing it. I'm not doing it. And we have no idea. How many times does someone talk about, what someone does or how we feel about a particular life experience, and we have no idea who's in the room? Just the other day, I was at an event and this person was going on and on about, I had to wear, we were in California, we were actually in Pasadena. I had to wear a mask for 8 hours. It was horrible. And they just went on and on and on about a mask and being in California, and they got to show their vaccination. They were going on and on and on. And then eventually the person looks at my husband and introduces himself to my husband. My husband's like, hey, hi, how are you? And this person happened to be from Akron. And my husband's like, oh yeah, we're from Sacramento. I'm pretty sure I didn't hear that person say another word like the rest of the time we were together, because they were dogging California. Oh, California. Oh, I can't, like, just going on and on and on. And I was like, that is so fascinating. And then when he found out we were from Sacramento, you couldn't hear it. You could have heard a pin drop. And that's an example of we can sometimes get into conversation and apply that same concept to a particular, technically geographic location is a dimension of diversity, right? And so apply that's a conversation that, it might not have meant anything to that person, but who was in the room and how were we made to feel because of that conversation? And so that kind of thing, geographic location is probably, something that can be the least offensive, but what about what's happening, right? That could be even more offensive that we're not aware of. When we talk about the dimensions of diversity is kind of like in 4 dimensions, right? We've got our identity and who we are in the center, but those primary dimensions, those are things that we can't change, that they're things that we're born with. And if we can change it, it's very hard to change. Then we've got the secondary layer of diversity, which are things that we can acquire, change, or discard over our lifetime, right? And so the secondary dimension is generally how we create our friend base. And then we have our organizational dimension, who we are professionally. And then we've got our cultural dimension, which culturally, that sort of informs our worldviews, right? That informs how we see the world. Each one of us has these 4 dimensions of diversity, these 4 sort of layers of diversity. And we have to be mindful of this in everything that we do, because we never know how, in ways that we engage, we never know how that might land with someone. And so that's where our emotional intelligence comes in. What questions do you have?
I'll just comment. No, I really think this is a very powerful slide. Thank you. And, I kind of apply it to my experience, and, I think everybody can do a good job at not assuming because they see what's the tip of the iceberg. This is kind of like what's underneath the surface of the iceberg. I feel like these are the things we don't see. And our city council code of conduct does say, like, don't speak about another person, like, if you don't really know about them. And so I think that's important because of this slide right here. So whether it's orientation or marital status or occupation, employment status, we got to do a better job of kind of being more mindful of each other, because down underneath that iceberg, that's important. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's gonna come from our ability to refrain from making assumptions. That's what it comes from. And I think you know your districts, You
There's
know
no district. There's no district. I'm sorry. There's no
or
district.
you
It's a little
you know
city.
your
It's that large. Yeah,
constituents.
yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, you get it. Same thing.
yes.
Same thing. Yeah.
You know your constituents, right? You know your constituents well. You've probably done a lot of work to understand who they are, the things that are important to them. There is a bias called the curse of knowledge. And the curse of knowledge is when we basically, you know too much and you don't really see the new information that's being added. And so we have to constantly ask that question, right? We have to constantly be saying, so how does that work? How did we get here? We have to constantly sort of maintain that curiosity. That is one way to not sort of settle, as it were, and kind of just sort of start taking things at face value, because that's when we begin to perpetuate some of the inequity that we'll talk about in a second. So
I have
a couple, oh, go ahead.
question. So, you know, I agree with the mayor, right? This is like the underground thing. I think when we talk about diversity, even with our constituents or ourselves, is, you know, that layer that's underneath. How, I don't know, you have it now, if not, maybe just like follow up, just like probing questions that are not necessarily taken personally, right? Because I think this underneath stuff, sometimes people may ask you something and you internalize it, and then that other person is like, whoa, where did that come from? I just kind of asked for this, right? But it could come from all of this that we're talking about, the different dimensions. But I think it would be really interesting to see, like, what are some of those probing questions, right? Like I've, you know, spent some time, it's help me understand what you mean by this, right? Or using your I statements. In my experience, I believe, or using the word kindly, right? Someone said, well, use the word kindly. I kindly ask, right? Because it's coming from a place of love and wanting to understand, right? But I think sometimes when questions are asked, some people could be defensive, right? It's like, what do you mean? And it's like, no, it has nothing to do with what you mean. I'm not questioning anything of this, but this comes up, right? It's kind of like it bubbles, right? Because it's bubbling from underneath. So I think for me, it would be great to have just maybe some of those probing questions that could be used, right, to understand a little bit more without knowing, because, you know, I think we all have our own stories, and there's parts of our stories that maybe we're not willing to share or ready to share or ready to even speak, right? I mean, it took me even a while to say, wow, this pandemic is traumatizing for everybody, including myself, right? This is a lot. And it's now the conversation around that is everywhere, right? Mental health right now, that's a huge conversation happening. But again, it's how do we are able to get those skills, to get those probing questions that are going to help just kind of calm down, you know, if this bubbles up. I think that is one of the challenges sometimes. I mean, you know, with constituents is, again, is I know those three and they tend to work. But I know that's maybe with different group dynamics, when we go into different layers, like organizational layer, the question may have to be different.
Not necessarily.
No?
I mean, I think when so what we're leaning on now is that emotional intelligence, right? So when you say to me, you know, how's the weather outside? Weather? Why are you asking me about the weather? Do I look like a weatherman? So wasn't expecting that response. Are you okay? What's going on? Right? And I think that is okay. Right? I think it's okay to stop, to take a beat, and to just check in. I mean, and I think you have to have that appropriate physical environment to be able to do that, right? I don't know that if you're in the middle of public comment, I don't know that I would do that then, but I think that's an opportunity to follow up with someone. And I think it's those authentic check-ins that really help us to sort of dig in. They're called everyday conversations about difference. And in those everyday conversations about difference, that's where we get to learn. So, hey, so tell me what's going on. How did you feel about that? And in that, we build relationships. Right. And so we get to learn from that perspective, but we're also building a relationship to be able to help us to move forward. So, I don't know that there are any, and I personally, I use the same question over and over and over again. Right. So if I see something that's out of line with what I expected to get back, that's interesting. Okay, so tell me more.
Mhm.
Right? Because that means I need you to keep talking because I need more information.
Mhm.
And so I really think it's about learning to trust our own instincts to be able to engage around those questions.
Thank you.
Yep. So what I want to do now is I want to quickly take you through some high-level primary dimensions of diversity. And then I'm going to give you an opportunity to sit with the diagram, and I have some questions for your reflection. So, so generational diversity is a form of diversity that we have to be mindful of. So this is in and of itself an assumption, right? Because it's sort of saying that if you were born here, then you do this, 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 and this. And we know that that's not the case, right? But we do have research that tells us that when we've got folks born in these particular periods, there are some consistent themes that we see. So these are some consistent themes that we can see from a generational standpoint. How do we encourage and support generational diversity? Right? And generational diversity is one of those things that can be talked about and we don't even realize it, right? So my mother was getting some work done and she needed to sign the contract. And they said, oh, well, just sign it and send it back to me. And she's like, I don't understand how you want me to sign it and send it back to you. I don't have a printer. And the person just kept saying, oh, sign it and send. And she's like, stop. Like, you're assuming that. And so what could have been done differently to make her feel included, right? And so things like that, there was no ill intent. It was just poor communication style. So when we look at, be it our staff, be it our constituents, what are we doing in order to ensure that we are making folks of all generations feel included and valued? Another dimension to be mindful of is gender diversity, right? This is an old definition of gender diversity. In California, we've got we know that in 2012, we expanded the definition of gender to include gender identity and gender expression. We also have Assembly Bill 396, or the Transgender Work Opportunity Act. And so we know that in the state of California, we have to be mindful that gender is an umbrella. And under that umbrella, we have gender identity, gender expression, and we include our transgender colleagues and constituents. What are we doing to ensure that we are creating inclusion and belonging? And yeah, gender pronouns are a great place to start, right? Announcing our personal pronouns is a great place to start. But in my opinion, that's the basics. Right? What are we able to do in order to ensure belonging? And that could very much be in our language, right? As an HR consultant, whenever someone wants me to look at a handbook, the very first thing I go to is I look at their dress code policy. And if they are splitting their dress code policy by male and female, I'm like, nope, we're not gonna have male and female. If a woman can't wear spaghetti straps, guess what? Neither can a man. We're not separating we're talking about who are we as an organization from a dress code standpoint. I mean, and that's pretty simple. But what are some of the other things that we can do? Sexual orientation, right? It's an identity based on attraction. And some might say, well, why is that even important? Well, I mean, I talk about my husband every day without fear of reprisal. Can we say that for everybody? And if not, why not, right? That's about safety, feeling safe to sort of disclose. Ethnic diversity. So here's the thing about ethnic diversity. We cannot see ethnic diversity. We cannot see ethnic diversity. We can see race. Race is eye color, hair texture, and skin color. Ethnic diversity is who we are culturally, our common ancestry. You can have two people with the same race and different ethnicities. And so what are we doing from an ethnic diversity standpoint? When was the last time we downloaded a diversity calendar? When was the last time we looked at all of the holidays that folks might be able to celebrate? And not that we're talking about giving folks the day off, but we're talking about recognition of, I had never heard about that holiday. Tell me more. Versus, what is that? Right? Which is, believe it or not, a reaction that an adult can have, right? So kind of thinking through, what does this all look like? And then ability. Physical ability, disability. And I include cognitive in this definition as well. I include that neurodiversity because ableism is a thing, right? I am being very ableist right now. I don't have on closed caption. You cannot scroll over my pictures to understand what is in my pictures. So if you were using some sort of screen reading program, you would not be able to understand the pictures that I have on the slide because I have not set them up for that kind of software. So understanding how are we ensuring that folks who fall into these categories, all of the dimensions of diversity, feel like they are included and like they belong. Because again, if one person isn't doing it, if one person doesn't feel like they belong, then we have not achieved it. And so what I'm asking you to think about is equity. I'm asking you to think about equity. And equity is about decreasing the barriers. Equity is about what are the blind spots that we have. And these are just the primary dimensions of diversity. We haven't even talked, we won't in this course, but we are not looking at necessarily that secondary dimension. But what are the barriers and what are we able to affect so that everybody feels as though they are included?
That's a powerful slide. I just want to say.
Say again?
I just want to say, this is a powerful slide. I just want to say that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, right? Like it just really helps us to understand, folks, everybody needs something. And we got to figure out, how do we give folks what they need instead of giving them what we want them to have? So I have given you a handout. And so on that handout, I put it in the chat. And so on that handout, you are going to have the dimension of diversity diagram. And that's on that first page. And I've given you the definitions of each of those dimensions. And then on that second page, you've got some questions for journaling. And so what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to take some time and looking at the entire dimension of diversity, all 4 dimensions. And I'd like for you to use that to answer those questions. And these are not questions that we'll talk about as a group. This is just journaling that I'd like for you to do on your own privately, just to kind of get ourselves prepped and ready for the next conversation. And then just to kind of reflect on what we've talked about up to this point. So was everyone able to access the handout?
I got mine, yeah.
And so if you would, why don't we take the next, I'll give you 10 minutes and then I'll kind of check in just to jot down your thoughts to these 4 questions. Which of the factors do you make snap judgments about? Those factors being the the individual factors in the four-dimension dimension of diversity diagram. Which of the individual factors do you make snap judgments about? Which of the individual factors influence your decisions in a negative manner? So when you look at any of those individual factors that make up any one of the four dimensions, which of them influence you in a negative manner? What factors cause you to try to avoid contact with others? And then lastly, think of individuals you associate with frequently. What are some of the factors from the dimensions that you are both aware of and those you assume to be true about the person? Before we go into our reflection period, what questions do you have?
So we'll just open the PDF, open up the PDF.
You can open up the PDF. It is, I have set it up so that you can type in it. So you should be okay to just sort of work right in that document. I will give you about 10 minutes and then I'll come back and check in with you. All right. See you in 10. All right. I want to check in. How are we doing?
All right, let's go. Let's go. Yeah, it's Friday. Come on.
So in checking in around what you've written, not necessarily wanting to know what you've written, excuse me, but what are some of the insights, aha moments that you gleaned? What do you know now? What do you now know having gone through that exercise? And you can just chime in, you can just jump in and share. What do you now know? What are some of your aha moments?
I'll go ahead and jump in. We like to keep our meetings and trainings really lively and active and engaged. So I'm gonna keep chiming in, but I do want to hear from my colleagues whenever they're ready. But in terms of like the individual activity, just looking at the dimensions chart, powerful, and the layers, because life is complex and there are layers to life, and not everybody understands the complexities and the layers. And so it's a really great breakdown. In terms of the questions on the PDF, yeah, I think the further you go away from yourself, the 4 layers that we had there, the dimensions, I think just naturally those are the sort of the factors that are more likely for snap decisions for all human beings in our natural ways. So that's the first question. The second one is, which influence your decisions in a negative manner? Yeah, I think whatever layer is closest to your personality, your inner core, because your inner core, well, not your inner core, but a person's inner core or my inner core is different from maybe another person's inner core. So the further we get away from ourselves, maybe I feel like, everything about ourselves, I think, is positive for the most part. People like to think of themselves as positive, right? In my opinion. And so, what's positive to us may be negative to somebody else in the real world. And so I think the layers that are far from us tend to be more negative than the layers that are closer to us. Third question, what factors cause you to try to avoid contact with others? I hope I'm answering the right questions. Okay. What factors cause you to try to avoid interaction with others? I actually embrace interacting with others, especially I like to hear different opinions. I'm a type of guy, person, where I just like hearing different things, and it's made a positive thing in my life throughout my short life. I feel like I learned a lot about the world by opening up myself and listening to diverse things, and so some people aren't like that, right? Some people like to kind of not think outside the box or step outside their comfort zone. Thank you for putting the questions up. I'll switch them back and forth. Fourth, think of individuals that you associate with frequently. What are some of the factors or dimensions that you are both aware of and those that you seem to be true about a person? And I guess I'll throw out one example here, which is I don't know. That's like that's a double question in one question. Let's see. Should it be that hard for me to answer this question? What are some factors? I don't know. The people I associate with frequently, it's in Milpitas. I just keep it Milpitas all the time. I really don't even leave town, to be honest. I do all my business here. And I probably leave town maybe 3 days a month. So I'm frequent in Milpitas, and I don't know. We just all get along, and assumed to be true. We don't do that. No. Okay, thank you. All right, next person, next person. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and these are questions that, when we spend time with them And this is something, an exercise that you can do frequently. This is around helping us to sort of understand, how do people show up to us, right? And where could we be reacting and we may not even know it? And how could we be, in some instances, operating in a way that's eroding at inclusion, right? So maybe even if it is, I grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up with the adage that you don't wear white after Labor Day. And so, when I see people after Labor Day wearing white, I'm like, right? Like my body language changes, my attitude, my energy changes, right? And I had to like catch that. And I'm like, why do I treat people who wear white after Labor Day that way? Don't really know, because my mom said so. Right. And I got that from my family, and that I carried that into my adult life. Right. I have since done the research on why that was a thing, and well, it shouldn't be. But then when we apply that to the context of our professional settings, our team settings, where are these different things playing out? Any other aha moments, insights as a result of the reflection on these questions?
I do appreciate the questions because like the mayor, I do agree that you have to be close to who you are, right? Your values, who you are, who you grew up around. I've always been told, tell me, is it like the people, 5 people or 7 people that are around you, and I'll tell you who you are kind of mentality. My mom, instilled in that, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. And it was like something I grew up with. And so, Milpitas has definitely influenced that, being a teen mom, and I believe in the culture of a village, right? I always use that. I think for me, number 4 resonates a lot because I'm about to turn 40, and it's that pivotal age for a woman, right? Because I'm not married, my daughter's grown up, and I want to so desperately change these narratives, right, that have been placed for us. And I thank Councilmember Fan for talking about, that earlier, because I think that is so true. With your question in terms of number 3, I used to, a long time ago, just when things made me feel uncomfortable, or when someone said something about someone else, something I do now, and I do it because of trust, right? You want to build trust, and something professionally is I want to know who could I trust and who can I not. And I always say something because I want to see, is that going to get back to somebody else? Right. And then so they say it, I'm like, oh, I know exactly who said it. And mentor taught me that. She said, when you come from a non-privileged space, you need to develop these little things to do so you know exactly what you're dealing with, and then you can control the factors that you can control. And so something number 3 for me, I've been doing that. It's not to avoid people, because I will never be like, I'm not going to talk to you. I forgive really fast, and I like to talk. Like let's talk about it. Before I used to close off, but then a mentor taught me to use that trick, to say, share things with people, see if they go tell the other person. And if you start seeing a change, then you know exactly who you said it, and you know how to deal with them. And that has worked so well, just to also protect myself and my boundaries. But I used to not talk, right? It was like, I don't want to talk about it. But so I guess for me, that influences number 4 as well. I'm super authentic. I just think it's easier. And I think any of my friends, my closest friends, could say, yeah, she is who she is, there, here, and everywhere else. And that's the way that I decide to show up. And when you talk about diversity, sometimes it's hard to show up with who you are, what you have, because of what you look like on the outside. And that's been difficult, and I think Vice Mayor Carmen Montano hit, the nail on the head earlier with her chat comment of institutional disadvantages. They play out a huge role of what access you have. And that influences anywhere from education to what you're able to have. And I think that has been a huge factor in why I decided to even run for office, was to try to change those systemic systems.
Yeah, well, and that systemic sort of inequity is what makes these questions so important, because a lot of what we hold, we get it from somewhere, right? And so the question becomes, where do we get it from? And so that's how we sort of move into this inequity. And so I say inequity at work, but it's really about inequity everywhere, right? So when we talk, the reason that we even talk about this is because there is inequity that we are feeding on. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you that some of the outcomes that we have, they are the way they are because of the systems that are already in place, right? So we're talking about structural or systemic inequity, right? And so that is a history of institutional isms, right? So sexism, ageism, racism, whatever you want to call it, right? And that is sort of what we are operating off of. And you, in the seat that you sit in, have the ability to affect some of the systemic or the structural inequities, because we know that it comes from the laws that are in place. We know that it comes from some of the law, and even in the seat that you sit in, there is a limit to what you're able to do, right? There is a ceiling. So I can't affect systemic inequity necessarily, but to some degree you can. And so we know that structural and systemic inequity is fed by institutional inequity, which the institutional inequity is policies, practices, or procedures, right? And so that's sort of the policies that we have around, whatever it might be. Maybe it's code enforcement, maybe it's I don't know how we're treating the policies around the unhoused, or
Affordable
whatever
housing.
the case.
Yeah.
Say again.
I'm gonna throw one out. Affordable housing.
Yeah, affordable housing, right? All of those things, policies, practices, and procedures. And so it creates that inequity because we can't do this. You talked about where you were able to sell homes to and who you were able to sell homes to, right? I mean, that's a policy, practice, and or procedure, right? That is that institutional inequity that was sort of built on some structural, or as a result of structural inequity. Well, the policies, practices, and procedures come from interpersonal inequity. Interpersonal inequity is between one another, right? That's how we're sort of operating between one another. Well, and that interpersonal inequity is then fed by that individual inequity. And that's those prejudgments and that bias within us. Right? So it's within us, we take it to that interpersonal realm. We then create those policies, practices, and procedures, and it then sort of feeds into what's already there. Or, if this was however many hundreds of years ago, begins the structural inequity. So that's why we talk about this. And those questions are for you to sort of dig into what are some of the things that I am sort of internalizing that is producing some sort of potentially individual inequity, because individual meaning it's you, what you're talking about. And then the next step is, how does that then manifest itself into my other interactions with other people? And so, as you can see, it could be any dimension of diversity. We're not necessarily talking about anything in particular. It could be anything. So how do we get here? So what we are talking about is that bias. Those 4 questions are there to help you uncover, when I say that inequity, so to kind of open up the word inequity a little more in terms of that personal inequity, it's there to uncover, what are your biases? What are your prejudgments? But how do we even get to biases and prejudgments? So it starts with a stereotype. And so what is the definition of a stereotype?
I'm gonna jump in again. A stereotype is someone's perception of you based on their reality, is my opinion.
Yeah, we'll broaden that. It's a perception of a group of people, right?
Yeah.
A stereotype is an overgeneralization of a group of people. And so where does it come from? Like, think about the very beginnings. Think about my, you don't wear white after Labor Day. Like, where do I get? And so I therefore have an overgeneralization about people who were white after Labor Day. And so where do I get that from?
I Googled it and it had to do with socioeconomic classes, the ability to take vacations. Yeah. During the warmer months that people could afford in the winter when you go to the other side of the equator. Yeah.
And that is not how that was explained to me. Let me tell you. that was not the basis of that.
Yeah.
I think you get it from everyone, right?
I got it from my dear sweet old mother.
Yeah.
Who got it from my dear sweet old grandmother. Right? And so we get it from our family. Right. And some of them, I mean, let's be honest, when we sort of open this up and we're talking about, immigration, and we're talking about being able to survive, some of the stereotypes that we received were from a perspective of safety, right? I've heard stories of people whose parents would punish them if they spoke their native language. They made them learn English. Well, part of that was because it was about survival, right? And so some of the overgeneralizations and the stereotypes we receive some of them are given to us because, well, it's just sort of how society works. Some of them are given to us from a survival standpoint. Well, once we get that overgeneralization, our perspective changes. And that perspective can be positive, neutral, or negative. The perspective is called bias. And when that bias changes, we can have an unfair attitude. And so when we're talking about, and so before I talk about the unfair attitude, when we talk about bias, in this case, it's a belief about a group of people. And there are two types of bias. There is explicit bias, which we're not so concerned about, right? Explicit bias it's not okay, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Explicit bias is conscious. We're conscious of it. We know that it's happening. The other form of bias is implicit bias. Implicit bias is happening without our awareness or control. And this is the definition from the Kirwan Institute on Race and Ethnicity from The Ohio State University. And explicit bias is okay because we know that it's happening, but implicit bias, we don't know that it's happening. We can't control it because it is unconscious. And so now that we've got this change in perspective, it affects our attitude and it gives us an opinion with no experience. Does anybody know the definition of an opinion with no experience? What that's called?
Is it an assumption?
It's prejudice.
Oh.
An opinion with no experience is prejudice. And once we have an unfair attitude, our actions change. And when our actions change, it's one thing when it's positive. And I mean, I guess you could call it another thing when it's negative. But what is a change in action based on your dimension of diversity called? We have a federal law and a state law around it. Discrimination. So when our actions change because of our implicit bias, it's still discrimination. So when we talk about implicit bias, it doesn't have to align with our declared beliefs.
Mhm.
So then we take it a step further. We have a declared belief that is X, but our actions are opposite of that. And so from the perspective of a person on the outside looking in, how do they now feel? So go back to that story, the exercise you did when we first started, right? So now you have somebody saying, go left when they're turning right. Now we're all confused, and now we don't feel valued. We don't feel respected. We have distrust. We don't want to engage. Like, all of these things are now happening because our implicit bias is doing one thing, but we're saying something completely different. Because they can be positive or negative. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. I think the media in recent months highlights a lot of the negative around implicit bias, but we have some positive implicit biases. We have biases that can show up positive for one group. I mean, I still have, I push back because I'm like, there's another group that's not included. And then how do they then feel about it? Then we could talk about that. So we have to be mindful, because if we're not aware of our implicit biases, and going back to those 4 questions, if we're not being honest with ourselves about the answers to those 4 questions, we are not opening sort of the book on what is our implicit bias and how do I address it. What questions do you have?
How do you react to someone telling you, like, you are making me feel X, or I feel X because of your behavior? Like, how do you how should you respond to that? What is like the professional way of responding to someone who says, this time, X is not making me feel safe. At this time, it's making me feel discriminated. At this time, when you're saying this is how it's making me feel, and then somebody just dismisses it. Like, what is the appropriate response when someone says that to you?
I say, I mean, so this is my own professional opinion. We have all been through sexual harassment training. And quite honestly, I say you treat it like a sexual harassment complaint. Really? Okay, so tell me what happened. And if it's me personally, I'm like, so I don't want you to feel that way. So talk to me. Because I don't want you to feel that way. So what do I need to do so that you don't feel that way going forward? And it's really about learning, because here's the catch. We all are different. We all come from different places with different perspectives. So what might not sit well with you, I might be okay with. Mm-hmm. And vice versa. And it's about having that individualized relationship with each person, and being able to move forward that way. Is that helpful?
It is. And something too that, I've, again, have spent just trying to figure out, even myself, right? Like doing that deeper work, like, where does this come from, right? And so I think when you grow up in a place where you see inequalities and it's poverty, like actions that, like you described, that make you feel not part of a group or that hurt you, you learn how to survive because you're on survival mode. So, I think sometimes you are trained to use your I statements, right? It's like, use your I statements, and you're saying it because you've already tried everything. And when there's no communication or no dialogue, at that point, all you could do is try to protect your own personal boundary. But for someone else, it could be totally dismissive. But if they don't know what the roots of where that's coming from, I think that's when I've come to realize that communication gets dismantled, right? And so that's something that I'm also trying to, as even constituents right now during this pandemic, right? I mean, I had someone yesterday that called me at like 1:40 in the morning and I was half asleep, but I still answered the phone call because I knew that they were calling for something, right? They were like, oh, I thought it was going to go to your voice message. I was like, no, how could I help? And they're in frantic mode. So it's also like for me, I had to really take a step back and say, okay, I just need to listen right now, but also define their definition of whatever it is, right? In this case, it could be discrimination, it could be sexism, it could be being sad, it could be whatever. But your definition might be extremely different than somebody else's. But when they express it to you, that comes from that layer underneath the iceberg.
Yeah, and I am by no means saying that, you know, and it's up to you and your values and belief system to determine if it's gonna be, you know, they are always right approach. That is not my recommendation. My recommendation is that both of us have to be able to coexist. So yeah, they get to tell you what their issue is. You also get to tell them what your issue is, and you got to come together to find the common ground. And so I think to some degree, you know, there are, you know, I do know people that are always on the launch pad ready to, and I'm like, whoa, like, that's your perspective, but what's the perspective on the other side, right? And kind of having that conversation. And then I think this is also one of those conversations that doesn't, so Glenn Singleton, oh, no, not Glenn Singleton, MIT has a framework, sorry, I lost, it's called the BRAVE framework. And the BRAVE framework is a framework that they use for having conversations. And one of the tenets of this framework is that you gotta be okay with not having resolution. Mm-hmm. Right? So some of these conversations you'll go through and you'll have conversation and you may have to say, you know what, let's take a beat and let's come back to this. And I think that's the, when we look at relationships, when we look at our friendships and how those things sort of happen, it's not a straight trajectory, right? There is some go forward, go back, go forward. And so I think this is no different. What happens in these situations maybe is that because they are conversations about topics that we all hold very dear, that are the core of our being, there can also be a lot of emotion wrapped up in them. And so it can get uncomfortable. But I think that's uncomfortable for this kind of conversation is kind of the place to be. Because when you're uncomfortable, that's where, you know, that's for me is a signpost that I've got to do work, right? I've got work to do in order to get better. And if we take it as such, then hopefully we will engage in that learning. What other questions? So we didn't take a break, did we?
We did 2:10. Yeah.
2:10. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm off. I'm late. Okay. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like for us to take a break. Have you all taken the implicit association test from Harvard? The Harvard implicit association test?
I have not.
Okay. So here's what I'd like to do. So one of the ways in which we find out about our bias is via the Harvard implicit association test. So here's the link. I put it in the chat for you. And so I would like for you to take the Harvard implicit association test. And again, this is for you. We're not going to talk about what the results are, but I want you to take it and I want you to sort of begin. It is a way to begin this journey of what we're going to be doing in terms of implicit bias and how you begin that process. So here's what it looks like. You can just click go. You don't need to log in or register. You can read the preliminary information, click wish to proceed, and these are all of the AITs or IATs that you can take. IAT stands for Implicit Association Test. And as you can see, there are a ton. I would encourage you to pick one. Maybe it's around age or gender or ability or race or maybe even weight. And so once you go into it, there is going to be information that they will ask. So this is a document that is kept up by Harvard. And so this is kind of an example of what you will do. You can click continue. And so it gives you, you're using your keyboard to do it. And so I want you to go through it. It's going to take probably about 15 minutes. You're going to need your space bar, the E key and the I key. So if you would, why don't we take a 10-minute break? And then if you would then spend 15 minutes going through your IAT. So that's 25 minutes. So then what I'd like to do is we'll come back together at 4 o'clock to finish up our time together. So again, you're going to do an implicit association test. I've given you the link. Take about 15-20 minutes to do your implicit association test and then take a 10-minute break. You can either do that 10-minute break on the front or you can do it on the back, and then we'll come back together at 4 o'clock and then we'll finish up our time together. What questions do you have?
I had a request. I am looking forward to taking this as a sort of the website there, but we have a thing in our city. We try to have these efficient meetings, and I think if we can just take the test and then come back even 10 minutes, if my colleagues are okay with that, if you're okay with that, Janine, in terms of bypassing that break so that we can have a efficient meeting time wise, and maybe finish up a little early. Yeah, because it's the vice mayor's daughter's birthday today.
Oh, okay.
We trying to get out there for
I didn't know that this was going to be a 4-hour workshop. So and I had made plans already. So
yeah, we kind of celebrate here
later.
So
then let's do this. Let's do this. Why don't so you've got the link. You can take the test whenever you have an opportunity to. Why don't we just take a 10-minute break? And then if you promise to take the test at a later date, we can do that. And then we'll just go from there.
I mean, we can take the test. I don't want to put anything above the business of the city. I just, we just want to, we really have been making it a thing this last year to have just super efficient time meetings.
Sure.
And, usually when we have our council meetings, we don't even take a break. We'll go from like 4 to 11 even, and just nonstop because we can rock and roll like that here in Milpitas. If that's okay with you. I do want to take the test right now though.
Okay.
And then I don't think, does anybody need the break, or it's Friday? I don't think no one needs the break. So how about like 3:50?
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. So 3:50, take the test.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back at 3:50.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Everything counts. All right.
Welcome back.
All right. Yeah, we
So-
love to have high quality meetings, the highest quality, but also we do our best to keep it efficient.
I am a huge proponent of efficiency.
All right.
So what, any aha moments? Any aha moments or learnings, insights? What do you know now as a result of having sort of gone through that?
I'll go ahead and jump in. No, I think in taking the like sort of the survey or the test, it may I feel like one thing that stood out, a feeling that I experienced is kind of the the time it took to respond. I took the weight, the one based on the weight, because I did gain some weight myself recently, so I'm really sensitive to my weight. Councilmember Chua, please.
Mayor Tran, I did the same item. I did it. I
Oh,
did a
yeah.
test on weight too.
You over there laughing at me.
No,
Oh,
I was like smiling because we did the same thing.
I know, right?
Sorry.
Okay, got you. All right, I'll just check in. But yeah, it's been sensitive on my mind, around my peers. I'll be at a local establishment with my friends, and we've known each other since high school. So, 20-year anniversary, 20-year high school reunion is coming up. So I'm very sensitive about my physical fitness. I got out the military, National Guard, a couple years ago, about a year ago. So I did gain some weight, and so I took that one. And so I think when I took the test, the survey there on the Harvard website, it just it took longer to answer questions. The time lapse took a little bit more time as I got toward the end, and so the results kind of showed for it. I think that's where the results at the end really considered the time that I took to answer those questions.
It does. That's how it
I should,
measures. Yep.
yeah, I should have been more consistent, because I took a minute to stretch, and I think it messed me up on the results. But that's my sort of a feedback to our group here. So
Yeah.
Mayor, I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you saying, like, sharing, we all have, I laugh with Councilmember Chua because I'm the same. I gained these 15 pounds that I'm trying to lose, and we're not moving as much. And it's hard, right? So I do appreciate you sharing that with us. So I just want to say thank you. And yeah, that test is, you try not to think about the questions as much, right? You're like, wait, is this the right answer? Like, you're going through them and you start seeing the same question just reframed differently. So you're like, wait, I answered that already. But I think it gives you a good hindsight of some of the things, in that category as well, because that's the same one I took as well.
Yep, it is. And so whatever that result is, use that to kind of fuel whatever the learning needs to be going forward, right? Whatever the engagement needs to be going forward, because the bias comes because of the time it takes us to think, right? And even if you have to think about, like, oh, I have to be conscious of X so that I don't do X, that's you working on that bias. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It is this, how we overcome our bias is about thinking before we speak, thinking before we act, thinking before we engage. That's how we can overcome the bias. And so I think this test is a tool to help us do that. Because there are over 150 known cognitive biases, and it's not like they all play one at a time. They are kind of all sort of layered in. And so this work, the test that you took, the information behind the information behind implicit bias, it all comes as a result of a social neuroscientist by the name of Mazrin Banaji. And she has taught at, I think she's been at Harvard, she's been at Princeton. And so this is some of the work that she has done. She actually has a book. It's called Blind Spot, The Hidden Biases of Good People. And so she tells us that the real reason that this is all happening is because our brain receives so much information that it can't possibly sort of take each piece individually. So in order to help be more efficient at the processing, it makes shortcuts. And it's using information to create these shortcuts. The problem is that the shortcuts it's creating, while efficient, are sometimes not logical or not modern. And so some of that stuff that we're thinking about, it is creating our bias. I mean, if you said you took the IAT on weight, just take a look at 90s sitcoms, right? And how we made weight the punchline of all those jokes. From a societal standpoint, that tells you how we feel about weight in our society. And so given that and all the other messages, right? I mean, it's no surprise why some folks feel the way they do about weight, because of all the messages that we've received about people and their weight. So
I want to throw out a show, Fresh Prince, Uncle Phil.
Fresh Prince, Uncle Phil, Friends.
Yeah.
I mean, you could run the gamut, right? And I like looking back on that, I'm like, I can't believe they let that stuff be on TV. Like, that's horrible. And those were adults. Just there were some shows where the jokes were about children who were overweight, right? So can you imagine being a child? Yeah, you're an actor, but they're still making comments about your weight. I mean, just
yeah.
So I go through that to say, like, yeah, the media's got a role that they play in all of this. And so there are some instances in which, we never had a chance. So when we talk about bias, when we talk about bias, there are over 150 known cognitive biases. Here are a few that I think are pretty prevalent. So affinity bias is a bias for people who are like ourselves. We've got confirmation bias, which is when we change our opinion, we will change our opinion to align with someone else regardless of our beliefs. So confirmation bias can also be referred to as peer pressure, right? So Mayor Tran, if you're in a city council meeting and you give or a meeting period, and you give your opinion first, there is a good chance that you are creating confirmation bias, because you've given your opinion, and as the highest ranking official in the room, everybody's going to want to align with you. Right?
I do it all the time.
So you could be influencing the opinion with confirmation bias, because people are going to align with you, just because that is a bias that can be created because you are the leader. There's attribution bias, is where we judge a person's behavior based on prior observations and interactions, and we make up that as their perception of them. So think about first impression as a lasting impression, right? And we never let somebody overcome whatever that first impression was. That's always who they are. Then we've got conformity bias. Oh, I'm sorry, I confused conformity and confirmation. Confirmation bias is where we draw conclusions about a situation based on our personal desires. Conformity bias is where we will align with someone else's opinion regardless of our personal beliefs.
Right on.
And then we have halo and horn effect, which is to put someone on a pedestal after learning something impressive. That's the halo effect. Horn effect is to view another person negatively after learning something unpleasant about them. And then we have gender bias. So one preference for one gender over the other. And so, like I said, those are just a few of the biases. There are over 150 known cognitive biases. There's even an IKEA bias, is that we are only, it only works if we only like it because we put it together. Like if we have a project, then we put the project together. We only like it because it's ours. So there's a lot of things out there, but that can sort of influence our interaction. And the thing about these biases is we don't know they're happening. So it's really important for us to know how they show up. So when we're talking about some of the behaviors, right? So these are a list of the behaviors that can happen and that help us to know that bias could be at play. So snap judgments, making decisions without any, with just making snap decisions with insufficient evidence, increasing expectations because of someone's dimensions of diversity, or downgrading qualification because of someone's dimension of diversity. So when you think about elitist behavior, think about uneven expectations based on someone's identity. Stereotypes. So we've got negative stereotypes, but what's the problem with positive stereotypes?
They're not always true, maybe. Like, I happen to be Southeast Asian. And so, like, for example, I think in society, like the Asian race, Asian American is like a model minority.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I am not very good at calculus or computer science or engineering. And that's a positive stereotype. Even though it's a positive stereotype, that's not who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that's detrimental to me.
Yeah, it is. So much so that when someone finds out you're not good at calculus, they're like, what? How can you not be good at calculus?
Exactly. And I feel less. Yeah.
Right.
I think one of the stereotypes that I experience a lot is, I feel, is being a Latina and a woman of color.
Mm-hmm.
When I express myself, I'm very affirm. I think that's the way that my communication style is.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's taken like that she's too good enough, or she thinks too much. Like, oh, like, look at her. Like, what is she thinking?
Mm-hmm.
But if it would have come from a man, then it's assertiveness. But because it comes from maybe a woman that looks like me, that I'm not supposed to be like that, it comes up as in a negative context. So I'm constantly fighting, bringing my true self, right? And just washing it off. But I think a lot of women of color, particularly younger women in politics, experience that, where maybe a male says something, it's assertiveness, but when it's a woman, it's too emotional. And my roots are, I am Latino, and unfortunately, there's a stereotype that we're really loud already as it is. So that is something that has been a stereotype that I know I carry, and I'm very aware of it. But yeah, it does make you question yourself a couple of times, especially when it comes from people that you work with every day, right? Because maybe that's a bias. I mean, it's implicit bias. And so trying to tackle that every day is a little challenging.
Yeah, right. And positive stereotypes, it's a presumption of competence. And while it might be a positive for one group, it means that there's somebody else that's been completely overlooked, right? That's not even getting a chance because they don't fit the stereotype. Positive stereotyping is also privilege, right? It's that where we are saying that person is qualified without them even having to apply, or without them even having to demonstrate that they have the skill. And in that instance, we may gloss over some of those negative attributes because it comes in the package we expect it to come in. I think earlier in our conversation, we were talking about the concept of talent, right? I think Councilmember Fan was talking about talent and how it's supposed to look a certain way. That's that positive stereotyping. And those are the things that we've got to get away from. And so when we see that positive stereotyping and all of these things, that it shouldn't say racism interrupters, it should say bias interrupters, because we have to be able to sort of jump in and say, so what, give me a second, walk me through how you came to that conclusion, right? Give me the details, right? I don't see how you got here, whatever that might be, because that is essentially short-circuiting that bias. And so all of these things are meant to sort of help people just sort of interrupt that bias. And if we can begin the process of interrupting that bias, be it with phrases on the side of the screen or our own phrases, that's how we stop this bias thing. We have to be able to recognize when it's happening and be able to engage around it so that folks sort of, oh, let me take you through it. And then we can begin to ask the questions. And from the seat that you sit in, as you ask those questions and you realize that there are gaps, you can help to fill in those gaps or prescribe additional duties or activities or whatever that can fill in that information. Other behaviors that demonstrate bias is cloning, right? I wish I had 7 more people like you. That is to devalue diversity. Good fit, bad fit. I mean, sometimes, I don't know if you are, maybe you're interviewing staff or you're interviewing folks for some of the various committees or advisory boards. You know, what does a good fit look like? And so I would challenge you, when we say good fit, bad fit, you know, are we really talking about how comfortable this person makes us feel versus what are they adding to the group? Right? What skills are they bringing? And then do we need those skills? Do we have a place for those skills? How will those skills fit with the skills we already have, right? And so that's, again, looking at that diversity, not even sort of looking at the package it comes in, but now we're talking about those tangible items that each of us has, we know what the definition is and how that fits into the greater picture. Wishful thinking is the ism doesn't exist, right? Oh, there's no more sexism, there's no more ageism. That actually is to devalue the experiences that everybody has gone through in order to get here, right? So we all have a story about how we came to be in the seat that we sat in. And that story, those experiences are valid. And we need to be able to honor that, because that's the diversity that we all bring to the team. That's why we see the situations the way that we do, and we can add that perspective. So whenever we're sort of whitewashing that, we need to make sure that we are not doing that, because that's not the right thing to do. We all have something to add. And then lastly, micro inequities. And so micro inequities are those brief everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages about a certain individual, that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. And so micro inequities, and I call them, like you may have heard them referred to as microaggressions. I call them micro inequities because they're not aggressive. They don't have to be mean. It could be something as simple as, you know, when you hear someone say, you know, I don't know, oh, you don't look that old, right? That's probably intended to be a compliment. But really, what should that person look like, right? Like, right, we're saying that if you are X, you should look like this kind of thing. And that's not necessarily intended to be harmful. Micro inequities are a manifestation of our bias. They can show up in gestures, what we do. So are you talking to somebody and then all of a sudden they pick up their phone and they start texting, or you're talking and they cut you off? words, right? So what we say, treatment, right? We say, I don't know, you say good morning to everybody except this particular person. And then tone of voice, right? How we say it, right? The example that I have heard before is, oh, where are you from? And you say, oh, I'm from, Milpitas.
Milpitas, yeah.
No. But really, where are you from? I'm from Milpitas, right? But what they really want to know is, no, you look like you don't belong here. And so I want to hear an answer that satisfies my stereotype for where someone like you should come from, right? And I mean, and that's essentially what's being said. And so, our tone, all of those things can make a difference.
Janine? On that topic, though, interestingly enough, I've even experienced, I guess, a stereotyping, if you will, by responding simply Milpitas in elected circles, where I serve on other municipal bodies, and we'd ask other elected officials, where do you represent? And I'd go Milpitas, and folks would be like, oh, Milpitas, oh shit, sorry, for whatever reason is associated with Milpitas politics.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to how these things can expand to just geographical biases.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Wow. Wow. What do you do with that? Right? I mean, and that's exactly it, right? And no one knows. And in that person's mind, again, they may not have any ill intent. They might think that it's perfectly okay, but it's about how you feel when you walk away. It's it is an accumulation of blows, right? It may not be one, but it's the fact that it happens over and over and over and over again.
One of my professors would call it death by 1,000 paper cuts. How microaggressions, they add up over time, and
they do.
Towards the institutionalized problems.
They do. And so all of these behaviors are behaviors that, as you think about, so the first part is, what are the biases that we ourselves carry, right? That's those 4 questions, right? To help us kind of figure out those biases that we carry. This second part is about, when we see biases in, our team, or maybe our staff, or even our constituents, like, what do we do about it? Because we have to be able to sort of address it on both ends. That's the only way we get to move forward. And that's the only way we get to value everybody's diversity. That's the only way that everybody gets to be included. So it's this journey of inclusion, equity. It's really about sort of understanding where we are in this journey and the role that we play and how we can fix it. What questions do you have? So as we wrap up, I want to just leave, a couple of things. So we've talked about, the questions for your personal reflection. We've talked about what the biases are. When it comes to language, you really do need to know, what are you going to say? When you see bias at play, when you hear it at play, what is going to be your phrase? You have to think about physically, what am I going to say? Because that can be your phrase to stop it. so that's one part of the language. The other part of the language that's necessary is inclusive language. So inclusive language is words that are free from phrases, tones that reflect prejudice, stereotypes, and discriminatory views of a particular people. And so here are some guidelines of inclusive language. You know, really being consistent, clear, intentional, and respectful. And in my mind, if we can be consistent, clear, intentional, and respectful, all of these other things will kind of fall into play. And then when in doubt, we have to ask, what is the right thing for me to say? How do I say this correctly? Because we got to address everybody. From your seat, I imagine you talk to a lot of people. Are you assuming that you know personal pronouns? Right? Are you assuming that someone's personal pronouns are he, him, his, she, her, hers? Is that the right thing to do? Right? I mean, that in and of itself is a way that we can begin to have inclusive language, right? Call somebody by their name. If we don't know personal pronouns, we need to call folks by their name as opposed to assuming that we know, because that is for us to reinforce bionism. And that bionism is about binaries, right? Male, female, right? You know, when we're talking about, you know, the constituents that you're talking about, right? Are we talking about, you know, are we saying non-X, right? So kind of what is our language, and how do our constituents feel about the language that we use, and is it supportive of everybody that we're talking about? I myself am working on moving from underestimated community to underinvested community. Because it's not I don't know that it's underestimated, but I know for sure that when we talk about resources, when we talk about whether it's, you know, education, money, what have you, the investments look different. And so I am trying to start saying underinvested communities. And so in my opinion, underinvested communities doesn't have a race and ethnicity. Underestimated, in my opinion, is speaking to a particular community. But there are communities that are underinvested that could be, you know, communities that are predominantly white. I want them to be invested in. Like, I want everybody to have access. So when we think about our language, what is our language projecting about who we are and what we're saying to our communities? And again, when in doubt, ask the question, because when we ask, we can get the information that we need. What questions do you have about inclusive language?
Maybe not a question, but I'll throw in just a thought. You know, I think speaking for myself is just about to have the principles of inclusive language, and just inclusive language. It just takes time to process, and I think human beings, we're so reactive, we're so instinctive. It's a survival trait, right? And so I just feel like as human beings, we're rational, civilized. That's what makes us human beings. And I believe the world can, and the people of the world can take more time to process, to think critically about inclusive language.
For sure. For sure. I mean, and the media, you know.
Okay.
The media does this weird thing, right? And I'm trying to get my head around it, because the media will say, first, you know, Black X, right? They talk about Pete Buttigieg. He's the first gay cabinet member. They talk about the Secretary of the Interior. She's the first Native American. And I understand that representation matters. And I understand that we need to get the message out some way. And I think even in that context, we are saying, well, yeah, they've gone their whole career and they've made it to a cabinet member in the White House, but it's also more important that they made it and they are this particular dimension of diversity, which, I mean, I don't know that that's the right thing to do. Like, I get it, but I don't want that to be all that we see. So I do see, like, you know, instances of where it happens, and I'm like, I wish it didn't have to happen that way, because I think in a lot of instances we will focus on that dimension of diversity as opposed to the work that they are able to achieve. So I say to you, you know, you are in a very unique position, and you're going to have to sort of balance when it's necessary and when it isn't. Because I believe that you have decisions to make that I know nothing about. And you've got to figure out, where does this fit, right? Because you're serving an entire city.
Yeah.
And there are things that you will have to do that some of us just may never understand. So in closing, I want to leave this with you because I think it's important. You know, you are leaders. You're leaders in the community. And, you know, when we talk about inclusive leadership, these are the top 4 inclusive leadership traits that come to us from catalyst.org. They surveyed 800 managers and employees across the world. And these are the top 4 leadership traits to be mindful of, right? So allowing people to do what we've asked them to do, be that volunteer wise, be that staff, be that constituent. You know, if we've asked them to do X, let them do X, right? And give them that ability to fulfill that, what they've been asked or have come to do. Accountability for what we can control, right? Holding people accountable for what they can control. And having that conversation to find out what can they control versus what can't they, right? That's that leadership piece. You know, demonstrating that courageousness, even if it requires personal risk taking, right? Stepping up and saying, we're not going to do that. That's not who we are. I think your city attorney started with some great things at the very beginning of our meeting today. And I'm like, those are awesome. I like that. Right? Just kind of upfront, this is who we are. And this is what we will stand for. Say again?
You just added that too. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. This is who we are. This is what we'll stand for, what we won't stand for, right? I think, and then the next step is that is when someone is sitting there and say, hey, we don't do that, right? We said we were going to talk about body language, like, so something's clearly going on. So hit me with it. What's happening, right? Like, that's the next step to those pieces, right? That's that courageousness. And then when we get it wrong, saying, you know what, I got it wrong, and I apologize. So let's talk about what needs to happen next so that we don't do this again. If we can incorporate these 4 leadership pieces, I think the rest of it will fall in place for us, because we're being open, we're listening, we're learning, we're engaging, and we can't help but to have that perspective. So it is important for us to come together around this, even from a leadership perspective, because folks are watching. We talk about implicit bias, but there's also implicit leadership. And so people are watching what you do, because we have to put these concepts into action. And when we can put them into action, then we get that belongingness. We create an environment where folks want to be. And for you, that environment is about a city that people want to live in. Right? That's about an environment where people are willing to spend, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a house and to send their children to school and to have babies and to grow old and to all those things. What you do today can affect someone's ability and desire to want to belong. What questions do you have for me? Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to come before you and to have this conversation. I hope that I hope that it's something that you will be able to take and do something with immediately following our time together today. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you
Thank
very much,
you.
Janine. I want to thank you. I want to provide some public feedback here. This is a public meeting. We are live on Zoom and YouTube. Pardon me. We're live on Zoom, YouTube.com, and Facebook Live. We got thousands of followers on our social media pages, and we are streaming this out to our followers right now. I want to say that this is one of the best trainings that I have been a part of in my 5 years plus here in Milpitas. Time really went by so quick. I feel like we've only done an hour, but it's been much more than that. And I would recommend you to any organization out there. And today you carried our city forward, Janine, here in the city of Milpitas. So we'll hear from my colleagues.
I just want to say thank you. I echo the sentiments of the mayor. I think that this has been one of the best trainings that it feels like we got this, right? And I just want to thank you for putting a strong foundation of understanding and just shining some light, in what could be such a complex topic that we're not going to master in just a one-day training. And Mayor, I do want to thank you for your vulnerability today. I have seen a lot of things, but today I saw your growth. And so I just want to say thank you for being present and making me feel present as well. I agree that it went by so fast, even on Zoom. And it was really nice to see your face when there's other people that weren't on for one reason or the other. I was like, is anyone else here? But I do appreciate our colleagues, being in attendance at this meeting. And I know that, regardless of the challenges, personal challenges that we had today, you guys are here, and that just meant a lot. And I hope that the vice mayor is having a happy birthday with her daughter, because I know how important that is as well. And Councilmember Fan, again, if you need anything, please do not hesitate to text. And thank you again so much for being with us this Friday afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Okay, all right, just check in. That's it. I guess, Janine, that wraps us up for this afternoon. Thank you for getting us through the afternoon efficiently, and your influence and impact with what you are providing through your training certainly reverberates, I think, throughout our city government. And I know you've done great work for other organizations as well. I'm gonna have to find you on LinkedIn. I gotta write you a recommendation.
Yes, please do.
You can put me down if you have any material as someone that is a full supporter of your training. So
Thank you.
yeah. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and see. Let me peek at the agenda. I think the last thing we got is the adjournment. I just want to verify. Yep, that's it. All right. This meeting is adjourned. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe.